Hello, little ones. How nice it is to see you again. It's been quite a while. And I get to be your storyteller for the next few weeks. Your regular teacher, Carolyn, has let me do that because I have missed you so much. And what we're going to do together is we're going to look at a number of stories from our Bibles that talk about children in the Bible and how much the children loved God and how God used those children to do special and wonderful things for Him. So the first story we're going to look at today is the story of the baby Moses. And that's found in our Bibles in the book of Exodus, in the first chapter. So if you want to get your Bibles or have a look at this story afterwards, you can find the book of Exodus, chapter 1, and you'll find out about the baby Moses. So come a little closer, and we're going to look at Moses and his family. Now, we're in the land of Egypt. You might remember that the Jewish people went to live in Egypt about 400 years before our story takes place. And they became slaves in the land of Egypt and were badly treated. And they lived in just very humble homes with rough furniture and not very many nice things. And in our story, we have our mother and father and a big sister. Her name is Miriam, and her little brother Aaron. Miriam is about 12 years old when this picture takes place, and Aaron is about 5 years old. Now the Pharaoh who was in charge of Egypt, he was like the king of Egypt. He declared a law that any new baby boys that were born had to be killed. It was a horrible law, a frightening law. And it just so happened that our mom, soon after that law came into being, she had a little baby boy. And she named him Moses. And she didn't want her baby to be killed. She loved him. She loved God. And she knew that killing children was an awful thing to do. So she hid her baby as long as she could with the help of, especially the help of Miriam, because little Aaron was still pretty small. And she kept him hidden in the house so that the Egyptian slave owners wouldn't realize that she'd had a little baby. But after about 3 months, the baby was getting bigger and it was beginning to cry a little louder, and she was having a hard time keeping him hidden. So she prayed to God and said, I don't know what to do. I don't want to put my baby and kill my baby. I'm going to ask you, God, to protect my baby because I think he's such a special boy and I love him so much. So what she did was she made a basket. She went to the river and got reeds. They were like cat's tails. And she wove them together and made a basket, lined it with kind of like a tar so that it was waterproof. And what she was going to do was hide little baby Moses inside this basket. And she put Miriam in charge of looking after the baby and the basket. So what they did, let me just change my scene here. Okay, so Miriam took the basket and she went down to the Nile River and she hid the basket behind some reeds in the water because we know it can float. And she herself kind of hid behind the reeds just to keep an eye on the baby to make sure that it didn't fall out of the basket or get too noisy or some creatures find it. Now while she was hidden away, some ladies from the Pharaoh's palace, they came down to the water with the princess, Pharaoh's daughter. And she came down to the water to have a bath because it was a little hot out, have a little swim and just a change of view, to be in the shade of the trees. And while she was there, she could hear a baby starting to cry. So she sent one of her maids into the water, and they fetched this basket and brought it to shore, took off the lid, and there was poor little baby Moses inside the basket crying. He was hungry, he was scared, he didn't like being in that basket. And she felt so bad because she knew right away what had gone on, that this was probably one of the Jewish slave babies that they've hidden. And while she was there looking at the baby, Miriam popped out from where she was hiding, and she went to the princess very boldly, because she was a bold, brave, big sister. And she said to the princess, "Would you like me to find a lady who can look after this baby for you, to nurse it and to keep it cleaned and to help it grow up for a couple of years?" And the princess knew exactly who Miriam was going to go and have look after baby Moses. But she agreed. She said, "Yes, you find a nice woman who can look after this baby and love it for me, and I will even pay this lady some money to look after the baby for me." So that's what they did. Miriam was able to take baby Moses back home to her mom and to her baby brother Aaron, to her dad, and they looked after baby Moses for 2 years, till he was a little toddler. But when he grew to be 2 years old, he had been weaned, he started eating solid foods so he could be a little bit more independent. Then Miriam had to take the baby, give him to the princess, and the princess took Moses home to live with her. She adopted this baby. So let's have a look at another scene where Moses gets to live. So Moses got taken home to live with the princess in Pharaoh's palace, and that's where he grew up. He was adopted by her, he was adopted by Pharaoh, and he never went home to live with his mom and dad again. So in one way, that was very tragic, wasn't it? That he had to leave home and his mom never saw him again. He grew up living apart from his sister Miriam and his baby brother Aaron. And we might at first think, well, isn't that sad? Nice for him to live in this beautiful palace, but he had to leave his mom and dad. But God had a reason for doing this. God knew that Moses had a really important, serious job that was waiting for him when he grew up. And by living in the palace, Moses learned how to read and write. He learned how to be a good administrator. He learned how to organize people, how to divide people in work groups, how to build things, how to keep records, all of the jobs that Moses was going to need when he grew up. And you know from Carolyn telling you stories about Moses not too long ago, how when it was time for all the Jewish people to leave Egypt and start walking home back to their promised land, that Moses was the one who led them for 40 years in the desert, and all the skills that he had learned in Egypt, in the palace, he was able to put to good use, and he was able to successfully lead all those 1 million+ people from Egypt all the way back home. So even though at first it seemed like a sad thing that Moses had to leave home, leave his parents, in the end it was a good thing. And Miriam, his big sister, and Aaron, his little brother, were able to go with him, and they walked with him the whole journey back to the promised land. So now we're going to have a look at another baby boy and what happened to him. Now the second child that we're going to look at is a little baby boy. But we're going to start here in his village. There's his parents, Hannah and his dad, and it was full of children and families, and everyone was very happy, except for Hannah. because Hannah didn't have any children of her own. And she would look out and see all these children running around happy. And she prayed every day to the Lord, please let me have a baby. I want to have a child just like these other ones in my village. And every day she would pray, week after week, after month, after years, she prayed to God that he would bring her a baby. And nothing happened, and she would cry and weep, and her husband would try and comfort her, but she wanted a baby so badly. And then they decided that what they would do is leave their village, and they were going to walk and go all the way to Jerusalem, to the temple, and she was going to pray directly to God at his very temple. So after a few days of walking, they arrived in Jerusalem, and in the distance Hannah could see the temple, which at this point was still the tabernacle, the tent tabernacle that Moses had designed and had carried with them when they were in the wilderness. So she went to the temple, and she got down on these rough cobblestones, and she prayed and said, Lord, will you please, I want a baby so much. And I promise that if you will give to me a baby, I will give him back to you. And he will be dedicated to your service for the rest of his life. And while she was praying and crying, and her lips were moving, she was just so intent on her prayer, the high priest came, and he saw her. And actually, he thought she had been drinking because she was so upset. And he asked her what it was she was doing. And she said to him, oh, I am praying and beseeching and begging the Lord that he will give me a baby. And he said to her, may it happen to you. May the Lord hear your prayer and grant you your wish. So she went home again happy, because here the high priest had said that the Lord will grant her her wish for a baby. And you know what happened? In about 9 months later, our Hannah had a baby. And she kept her baby for 2 years, just like Moses' mother did. Do you remember when he was a baby? She kept him for 2 years. And when our little baby Samuel was 2 years old, Hannah and her husband and little little Samuel went back to Jerusalem, and they met the high priest again, and Hannah had her little baby boy, little 2-year-old at this point, and she said to the priest, this is the baby that I was praying for. This was the boy that God gave to me as a gift. And I promised him that I would give him back to the Lord if he would give me this baby. So that's what I'm doing today. I'm bringing back baby Samuel, and I'm going to give him to you. The priest now, the high priest, is going to adopt baby Samuel, just like the Egyptian princess adopted Moses. Samuel left living at home with his mother, and he went to live in the temple with the high priest for the rest of his life. So Samuel went and lived with the high priest and his family, and he lived in the temple for the rest of his life. He never went home again to be with his mom and dad. And once a year, Hannah, his mother, would come and see how he was doing and bring him some new clothes. But otherwise, this was his new home. He was adopted to live at the temple. Now, when he was about 12 years old, one night, he and Eli used to sleep right inside the temple. So one night, when he was about 12, he went to bed. Eli went to bed over here. It was getting to be nighttime and quiet, and Samuel was just beginning to drift off to sleep.
Samuel, Samuel.
He stood up and he went running over to Eli and he said, "Sir, what is it that you want? I'm here. I heard you call me." And Eli said, "I didn't call you. You must have been dreaming. Go back to bed." So Samuel went back to bed and he lay down again, started falling asleep, and then
Samuel.
Samuel jumped out of bed again and he went running back to Eli and said, "I did hear you call me. You called my name. What can I do for you?" Eli said, "No, it wasn't me." And then it occurred to Eli, I wonder if it's the Lord. I wonder if it's God speaking out and calling Samuel. Because Eli knew that Samuel had been a special baby, that he had been a gift from God to Hannah, and that he had been dedicated to God's service in the temple. So Eli said to him, "Go back and lie down, and if you hear the voice again, I want you to say, 'Speak to me, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went back to bed, lay down, drifting off to sleep, and then he heard,
Samuel. Samuel.
This time he jumped out of bed and he knelt down and he said, "Speak to me, Lord, for your servant is listening." And the Lord told Samuel at that time, "You are a special servant of mine. You are going to be a great prophet and you are going to lead all my people Israel. You are going to anoint kings for me. You're going to speak for me my words. You are going to be the most important prophet that has ever been amongst the people of Israel." So even from before he was born, Samuel had been chosen by God to be a special servant of God's. And his training in the temple, even though he had to leave home, had to leave his mom and his dad and live in this strange place, it was so that he could receive the training from God about all of God's laws, about the things in the temple, the candles and the altars and the Holy of Holies, and that Samuel would know, be a dedicated person to the Lord, and his whole life was meant to be a service to God. So even though it was hard, they didn't understand at first, God had chosen that baby boy right from the beginning to be a special servant, a special minister for God. And that can happen to any of us. We don't know when we're little children sometimes what it is that God has planned for us. But God does have plans for each and every one of us and for our lives, and special things that he wants us to do. And we have to be like Samuel and say, "Speak to me, Lord, for your servant is listening and we're willing to obey." So next time, when we see each other again, we're going to learn some stories about two little girls who were prisoners of war and had tragic lives, and yet they were used by God too. So until then, we'll see you again. Bye now.